Good morning. What I'd like to do in starting off is give a little bit of my perspective and biases because I'm a bit opinionated, and so at least I recognize coming in that you should understand where I am coming from. Most of my career for the last 17 years, in fact, my entire career for most of the last 17 years has been online and has largely been in advertising, focused on monetization. I worked first in the newspaper industry and helping launch newspaper websites and build business models around them, actually pre-web and newspaper new media projects in the early 90s. I started one of the first ad-serving ad network companies called Real Media, which became 24/7 Real Media and then was recently purchased by WPP. And then I started an advertising targeting company called Tacoda, which I recently sold to AOL Time Warner, and I even spent a few months as the Executive Vice President of Global Advertising Strategy at AOL, which would be other stories. But before that, which I think gives you some perspective, I used to be a newspaper lawyer. And while I've been fortunate to have accomplished some things, and you get some little awards, and the ad age names you things, without question, the award that I'm most proud of is 15 years ago winning the James Madison Award from the Society of Professional Journalists for contributions in support of the free press and running hotline services and doing pre-publication libel review and filing amicus curiae briefs in the courts. So I believe in news, I believe in journalism, but I also believe if you can't make it, pay, get out of it. So, and these are some things I've written about in the past, so they will sound familiar to some of you. First, did anyone read the story yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about McClatchy's earnings? Did anyone read this quote? Did anybody read this quote? We believe that the majority of the decline that we are currently seeing is cyclical and therefore temporary. Gary Pruitt, CEO of the second largest newspaper company in the United States. I think Gary is an extraordinary executive. I like him. But this is bullshit. I mean, come on, it's not, when are we going to get by the cyclical part and recognize that it's secular? I mean, what empirical evidence exists to support this? Does anyone think there's any empirical evidence when the line has been going like this for 23 years? It's a big cycle we're talking about. Now, part of this is, and this is why you can't hold it against Gary, the people who have risen to the top and are doing well in the newspaper industry are doing well because they have been able to run a manufacturing and distribution operation really, really, really well. And they make sure that it works like it did yesterday. They make sure the newspaper shows up on the doorstep by 6 a.m. and they make sure the car dealer doesn't get pissed off. And that requires don't trying anything new. Don't put a new strapping machine into distribution because it may screw up and the newspapers won't get there and you lose 2% of your circulation. And also, take the car dealer out to golf or lunch at least once a month and the money keeps flowing. And people that are really good at that are not the same kind of people that are great at innovation. So it's not surprising to see this. But this is one of the reasons why we have not seen change for the last 17 years, that this should have been like as clear as the end of the nose on their face. Oh, I know. I was hesitant to tell people where I came from, but I knew there were enough people that knew. And I'm going to say, I think he's an extraordinary executive. Okay, it starts today. I had by coincidence, 15 years ago, I was at lunch. I can't remember the exact day, but I was at a lunch in New York, Pennsylvania with Dean Singleton, the then and current CEO of Media News. And what was unusual about that day was the day before he dropped a bit of a bomb on the newspaper industry in the United States. He shut down the Houston Post. He actually sold the Houston Post, a circulation list, and the brand to the competitor Houston Chronicle that day, the day before, of the Hearst Company, for about $100 million. It was controversial because we're talking about, I think, a couple thousand employees. It was controversial because it was about $100 million. And of course, he had already scheduled this lunch. There were about 5 of us. He was there. And the first question was, well, why? And if people know Dean, he doesn't, he doesn't feel like he needs to have public supporters, he doesn't need to have that validation. He said, look, I'll tell you, but I'm just not going to talk about this again. I have cleared that I can talk about it because I talked to him about this a few years ago. And he said, it's real simple. It's 2 newspaper town economics. He said, and it's Chevy buyers versus Lexus buyers. He said, we were the highbrow newspaper in Houston. Newsprint's coming up. Our cost structure is fixed and growing. Our revenue is flat. And he said, there's a lot more they have the Chevy readers and we have the Lexus readers, and there's a lot more Chevy dealers and Chevy buyers and Chevy advertising and classified, and we're going to lose. And the moment we start declining, it's a death spiral. He said, I either get my $100 million now or I'm spending $100 million in losses to lay people off in 3 years once newsprint comes up and we go under. And so what I think people have to understand now is, given the competition from the internet and everything else, he said, because in a 2-newspaper town, you don't control your margin. You can't gouge your consumers and your advertisers because you have competition. You don't have the monopoly protection. Well, guess what? In an internet world, you don't anymore either. The other thing that came out of it was, and one of the things he said, and this is something that we talked about. He said, don't think that the Pulitzer, and I won't give this entirely to him. I'll actually give credit to this to Art Howe, who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from the Philadelphia Inquirer in their heyday under Gene Roberts. And he said, do you know why the Philadelphia Inquirer won? And I'm like, why? He said, it wasn't because of Pulitzers. He said it was, we kneecapped, we had better connections to the mob, and we kneecapped the Philadelphia Bulletin distributors on the streets. We won the distribution war, and only after we won the distribution war did we start winning Pulitzers. Look at the great newspapers. Look at the 2 newspaper cities where one went down, and many times the best journalism was with the loser. The one that won was in distribution and manufacturing. And the third thing is, and I have to say this just to be clear, I am on the board of directors of A.H. Belo Company, a public newspaper company. So what I say here is clearly my opinions. By no means represents the company. You may get a sense of what I say in some of the board meetings. But there's been a lot of discussion, and I know he's here, but did Craigslist, kill newspapers? Well, what people don't recognize, it wasn't Craig, it was newspapers. They've been gouging consumers and advertisers in the classified space with their monopoly for 20 years. And as soon as people actually find out that it's free distribution and it's great content, you actually recognize that's where the business model should have gone, and the newspapers weren't. And so I think there's nothing more important than newspapers facing reality, and that it's a market problem, a business problem, model problem, and a cost problem. It's not a news problem. And prepare for disassembly.